Hello, Michael here from Small Robot Studio with another Renderman 23 tutorial. Today we're going to be having a look at how to do holdouts and composite CG assets onto live action plates. Still live action plates, we're not going to be doing camera match moving in this one. And this is going to be kind of a bit bootstraps. We're not going to be doing anything exciting with matching the camera up to the back plate. We're just going to sort of jury rig it. And this will work fine for most cases. I'm just going to show you a pretty simple way of setting up a couple of shots and lining up your camera fairly simply. So this is the image we're going to be dealing with, and we're going to put some a CG element onto this. And what I've done is I've got a reference for the size of the model that I'm going to be putting on. In this particular example, I'm going to be using tongue face. If you followed the channel for a while, or if you have seen my Instagram, you will have seen them around there. And also I've got this square plane here. Now I wanted to use something that was artificial, because I knew that it was going to be nice and square, as opposed to this chopping board, which is made out of blackwood, which is obviously wood, a natural material, and has a tendency to warp. And as good as you might be on a bandsaw, it might be a little bit crooked, or you might have sanded it a little bit skew if. So it's nice to have a nice square object that you can use to line up a plane. And once we've got that lined up, then we can just go back to our reference that we're going to be using. Now you'll notice there's a slight shift between those two. That's if I was trying to line this up with this, obviously it wouldn't work, but fortunately this shot and this shot are actually lined up nicely. The camera just shifted slightly on the tripod when I took this photo, but we're only going to be using this one for a lighting reference as well as the size and scale reference for our model. So what you want to do is take 3 shots. Take one shot of a nice square object in your scene, and then a reference model, so you can compose the shot in real life, and then your back plate. So in Maya, we will set up a camera. So we'll go create camera and camera. First thing we need to do to it is find out the focal length of the camera that you used. I was using a 28mm lens on my Sony a7 II in this particular example. And if you're using a mobile phone, oftentimes the equivalent focal length is 28mm, but you'll need to check the specs for your phone. Then we'll add in a image plane, so create there, and open our image. So we're going to open up our image that we're using for the to line up our plane to begin with. Now I'm just going to split the viewport down the middle like this, and then on the left hand side we're going to make this camera 1, and so you can see there the image is nice and squared up, but obviously the plane isn't yet. Now I'm going to turn the gate on so we can see that a little bit easier. And you will also need to make sure that the aspect ratio of your camera is the same as what your image is. I already cropped this image to be 16:9, which is the same as 960x540. So if you haven't done that, just make sure you have before you go in and try and do this. Now it is going to be a matter of getting this plane to line up with the top of this lid here that I just took off a box of whiskey, if we're being completely honest. Now you can do it with the grid lines, but I actually prefer to create a plane. I just find it a little bit easier to see. So we're going to go to polymodeling, just grab a plane, increase the scale of it, and we're going to go to plane shape, object display, drawing overrides, enable overrides, and disable shading. And now what we can do, instead of trying to line the camera up to the grid, and because you can't resize the grid, that kind of makes it a little bit difficult. We'll turn the grid off there, and we'll turn the grid off there. Now we can just move this, and then we'll move the camera up to get it a little bit closer. Something like that. Now we want to not rotate this as best as we can. We just want to rotate the camera because we know that this is squared with the grid, the Maya default grid, so we know it's going to be, when we're chucking objects into the scene, we want them to be flat with the grid as well. particularly if you're animating or something like that. So can actually just zoom out a bit here, and our objective is just to get those lines to follow the lines of we'll probably use the inside lines of that lid. So now with the right hand view I can rotate the camera or tumble it. Okay, that looks pretty close. So if you're looking at the grid lines there, following the inside of that, and if you haven't matched up your focal length of your camera, you're going to have a lot of issues because it's going to skew much more than it is in the image. Also, it's worth noting that most cameras are going to have barrel distortion on them if you haven't corrected it already. So lines close to the edge and top of the screen are going to kind of bow a little bit. You'll be able to see it just a little bit there with those lines. It's pretty minor on that lens that I used, even though it's quite old, but it is apparent. So if I'm happy with that, with the camera selected, I want to go to, well actually we'll just double check. We'll move this into position and I'll just, yeah, that looks pretty good. Okay, so let's select the camera, go to the channel box editor, select all the translate, rotate and scale values, right click on them and lock selected. And now this is so you don't accidentally move into this viewport and tumble the camera, and that will throw your alignment off, and then you'll have to redo it and you're screwed at that point, so you don't want to do that. Okay, so with our plane in place, what we're going to do is go to the channel box editor for the plane, and I'm just going to change the subdivisions to 1, and now I'm going to line the plane up with the chopping board that I used here as the ground. And it looks like our right hand side's a little bit off and it's a little bit skewed there, so even though it was pretty good on that, I might just line that up a little bit nicer. So I'll just quickly adjust that by unlocking those values and rotating the camera slightly. Now, like I said, it's a bit of a bootstraps way of doing it. We could go into Nuke and we could do camera matching or something like that. Some people have recommended F-Spy. I've got no joy from using F-Spy with Maya. If you've seen anyone use it with Maya and have any success, I'd love to see it. I haven't been able to work out how to get it to work well. So I'm just going to do a couple of fine adjustments to this tabletop now. And this is just to mimic the surface of that. So when we've got the lights in, and it's lighting up this floor, we won't see any weird disparity between the edges of the platform and the edges of what the light is hitting. Now we have a nice surface. We're going to create the holdout now. There may or may not be, depending on what version of Renderman 23 you've got and whether or not this bug has been addressed, an issue with creating holdouts. So when you create the holdouts, the normal workflow is to select your object. Before we create it, I'm just going to give it a material, and I'll just call that wooden floor. You know what, actually, I'm going to use this one here because it's basically the same color as what the platform is. So we want to use a material that is a similar color, and if you can, obviously use the texture to what the real floor is, just so when you get light reflections, they are similar or as similar as you can to the type of material that you're getting. So we're going to, this is the button here to create a holdout. So you want to select your mesh, click holdout, and if you get this error here, that may mean it is not working correctly. What we'll do to double check whether it is or not is create a sphere, and I'm just going to move the pivot to the bottom of the sphere and then move the sphere to the grid, because I know the grid is lined up with the top of the platform there. We will create a light, and I'll just light this very quickly. Something worth noting when you're lighting your scene is, particularly with these real world examples, if you normalize the lights, can make it a little bit easier to balance the values of your lights out, because regardless of their size, you'll get the intensity will work the same. It sort of depends on how you prefer the workflow. I generally would do that just as I find it easier to think about, but it's not necessarily the right or best way. It's just, for me, it's the way that works. Alright, so we'll just make sure that Renderman is the renderer, and if we hit an IPR, we should be able to see, so you can see the holdout is not working and the light is probably not bright enough. There we go. So that sphere doesn't appear to be creating a shadow, and we could probably change the backplate to the actual backplate now. So we'll do that just by going in here under the backplate, and we'll just open up the correct one, which is this one. We're not going to make this backplate visible in our actual render. We're just going to composite it in after the fact, so don't worry too much about it in at this point. But what we'll need to do is select our object, try and get this to work, go to render stats, and we're just going to disable holdout, render it, and as you can see, that has made it so the textured floor is visible, which we don't want. So we're going to re-enable the holdout, re-IPR. We will try clicking the holdout button again. That may have done it. Rerun the IPR. There we go. You have to fiddle around. If you do it in those exact steps, that should work for you. So now we can see that we've got the correct thing happening with our scene. Now we're going to add in an HDRI image. I've already taken an HDRI of my apartment, which was where this was shot. So we'll stick in a Pixar dome light and we'll open up the image. And I didn't shoot this on the same day. It was cloudy and rainy when I shot this, and this was shot on a nice sunny day with direct light. So I'm just going to reduce the exposure to 0.4 maybe, and we'll run the IPR again and make sure that primary visibility is off. We don't need to see the background because the plate is going to be our background. And then at this point, you want to start looking at your reference image versus what you're getting out of the render, and you're going to try to match up those lights and shadows. So in this particular image, what I'm looking for is the light direction is coming from the right hand side. It's nice and diffused, and I was using my phone to just give a bit of extra light on the right as well, which is why it's a little bit warm. So it's probably something like a 5500K light would probably be okay, which is going to create that close sharp shadow, and then the diffused light coming from the sky is going to create this softer shadow here. So I'm going to go ahead and add in those lights. The one other thing that we want though is another holdout for the window, because we're not getting any reflection of our ball at the moment, and there's a window. I butted this right up against the window so we'd have the reflection, so we'll put that in now. It's the same method as what we did for our chopping board. So we're just going to create a plane, and we'll just rotate that, scale. Now I know that it's butted right up against the chopping board, so I just need to line that up, which I'll do from the side, and then just go back to our normal view, and I'm just going to change that to be invisible as well, or see-through, and we will want to make sure that it is not overlapping the door frame. I'll tell you what, I haven't lined this camera up very well because I'm rushing for the sake of the tutorial, so spend a little bit more time on it than I am. When I practice this, I did actually get it a lot better, so learn from my errors in this. I'll still be able to get it to work though for the most part, so we'll just continue on like I did it perfectly the first time. We're going to create another holdout with this. First we'll need to add a material to it, and we'll just call this glass. And it needs no diffuse, and it needs a glass lobe with a refraction and reflection of 1.0 and a IOR of 1.33. And we'll just check that that's rendering correctly. It's probably having the same issue. So we'll just try enabling the holdout. Oh, that seems to have worked. Okay, cool. Second time's the charm. So we're starting to see a little bit of reflection there. I probably wanted a little bit more reflection. I'll put a backlight on there to get it to reflect a bit more. But I'm going to go ahead and put in the mesh that I want and light the scene, and then I'll show you what that looks like, and we'll move into the next stage. Okay, so you can see it rendering up here in the IPR. I've added a few lights in and just fixed a few things with the camera so it looks pretty good. The lighting isn't 100% accurate to what it would be in the lighting reference. You can see I'm still getting a nice soft shadow, which is what I want. The value is very close, but I actually added in a nice little rim light as well, just so he popped a little bit more against the background. It was looking a bit dull otherwise. I could go through and probably do a bit more to this and light link so I didn't get such a soft shadow on the ground, but for this one I think we're going to call that close enough. So we will now go through and do the AOVs for this, and just so you can see, this is the setup. So it's just the character, he's pretty close to the window there. I've got that backlight there which is creating the rim and also helping to get him a little bit lighter on the back, so we're seeing a bit more of that reflection in the background there. Also I've got a large light and a small light, which is replicating our diffuse light and the light that I was using from my mobile phone. You can see I've got the temperature set to 5500K, which should be about the same. Okay, so let's do our AOVs. We're going to go into our render settings and go to Renderman and AOVs. Now I did an AOV tutorial last week and we're going to be doing something very similar here. So we're going to create a lobe and we're going to call this passes, because I can't think of a better name, and we will just grab the direct diffuse, direct specular, indirect diffuse and indirect specular and pop it in there. We do not need to get the emissive lighting as a pass because all we need to see are these here. The last thing we need is our shadow pass because we're going to be compositing this over a plate, and I'm just going to create its own lobe there. Now for passes, we're going to make those denoised, and for shadow, I don't believe denoising will work on the shadow, but we will attempt to do it anyway. I've got to do a little bit of investigation. I'm not sure if I'm doing something wrong here. I will update you in the comments if I can regarding this. Because the shadow is generally fairly hard to see anyway in the scene, you don't really tend to notice the noise in it, but you could always add a little bit of Gaussian blur to get away with it if you wish. This is only going to be the cast shadow. We're not going to see the shadows on our actual mesh being in this. Okay, two more things I wanted to bring up before we continue on. I just want to show the render again. I had something enabled that I'd forgotten to show. If you have a look at the shadow here, that is obviously incorrect because we're getting some weird artifacting. Basically it's creating a kind of border, whereas if we look at the correct render, it should be sort of dark and more consistent the whole way around. Obviously this is not rendered as far as that, but you can see it very clearly that that is not correct. And the second thing that's not correct is that the shadow pass, you shouldn't be able to see basically any of that, so I don't know why it's done that. I've done a little bit of investigating, but I can't seem to recreate the same issue in a different scene, whereas I'm using the same method I had previously and it wasn't doing this, so I'm not sure why that is. Something to do with the shadow pass specifically. Try changing the name of the scene, didn't help either. So what we're going to do to fix that is we're going to go up to the render settings. We're going to disable learn light results, so that will fix the shadow. And then output holdout matte, this is going to be for our shadow pass. We're going to create it as a separate AOV. So now when we IPR, you'll see that our shadow has not got those weird artifacts. Obviously it will take a second to fully render up there, but you get the idea. Well, I'm stumped. Our shadow pass is now correct and working. So maybe enabling that as a separate AOV fixes the problem. It didn't previously, but here we go. Living and learning live in the tutorial. But you can see that that shadow issue is fixed there. So if you're having that issue, make sure you disable that learn light results. Otherwise, we'll keep those AOVs as they are. The other thing worth mentioning is the beauty pass. If you want your other passes denoised, make sure that you've got denoising enabled on your beauty pass as well, otherwise it won't work correctly. So we'll just go ahead and batch render this now. Alright, here we are in Nuke, and we're just going to bring in our images. I've just got them here in Windows Explorer, so we'll just drag all those in, and we'll also grab the plate. Okay, now I've set the scene. You'll see this format to 960 by 540, so I'll just need to reformat the plate to be the same as the root format, and then we're just going to grab our passes filtered. Yep, that one. And we're just going to do the same thing that we did in the AOV tutorial. If you haven't already watched the AOV tutorial, make sure you do, because it's going to show how to set up what I'm about to do. Okay, so what we've got here is our beauty pass rebuilt, and our shadow pass also rebuilt. This is quote unquote denoised. It is obviously not very well denoised. I'm not sure what the story is with shadow passes and why they do not denoise. I'll have to do some further investigation into that and repost the result in a denoise tutorial. But if I find out before then, I will make sure I put it in the comments for you. So check down there, or if you know the answer, let me know down there. Now, you were probably thinking the best thing to do here would just be to grab that and stick that underneath it and invert it. That would maybe work, but you're going to have some issues with the alpha. Particularly when you add in your backplate. So what we're going to do, and this is what I learned from reading the documents, which if you haven't already, you should always be reading the documents, because they're just quite good nowadays as opposed to how they used to be about 10 years ago. Alright, so we've got our shadow here, and what we're going to do is keep that shuffle as is, and we're going to need a merge. This has to be a plus into that shuffle, and then on the other side we're just going to grab the beauty. We'll just use the variance because it's just the alpha that we need out of this. So another shuffle, and we'll just grab the alpha out of all that side, and then plug that into the A channel. Okay, and then from our beauty composite, we'll create a shuffle copy with one going into there and two going into there. And then what we'll do is we'll grab the RGBA from that and the alpha from the second input. So we're just grabbing the alpha from this side, merged from the shadow, and then the RGB info from the composite. Then we'll just create another merge with A going into the shuffle copy and B going into the backdrop plate. And then if we hit that, you'll see that that works correctly now. And that is pretty much all there is to it. It's fairly straightforward. There are obviously some hiccups involved, and obviously I've been having some issues with the shadow pass. I'm not sure why that is, but like I said, I'll let you know in the comments if I have any updates to this tutorial so far as the workflow goes. But generally this will work for you. Then you just need to go in, and I didn't put a crypto matte with this one, but we could do a crypto matte. We could sort out this shadow, we could blur it a little bit using a crypto matte to sort of isolate it, and then yeah, we'd probably get a little bit better result. And obviously, you know, at this resolution you can't really see it, but if it was animating, that would probably be a bit of an issue, so we'd want to go through and fix that. Otherwise, the denoise has done a pretty good job on our subject, and there was only 128 samples, so you know, not massive. But yeah, that's pretty much all there is for this tutorial. If you liked the tutorial, make sure you hit the like button. If you've got any questions or comments, leave them down below. If you want to see more of my work, check out my Instagram or the Facebook page, link in the description. And if you would like to stay up to date with the tutorials I'm bringing out every week, make sure you are subscribed for more content like this. That's it for now though. Thank you very much for watching and happy rendering.